Good morning. It is good to be back with you, and it is good for many of you to be back too, because I think we've all just sort of been different directions over the last several weeks. I want to say up front how grateful I am for the 6 guys who filled in for me while our family was able to just get away for several weeks. And that's the first time we've ever done anything like that, where we did a series and just had 6 different guys at different campuses, and they all just did a fantastic job. And I want to thank you for the way you got behind them, prayed for them, supported them. It's the kind of move that just makes my heart soar in regards to what that means for our future as a church. And so I thank them and I thank you for what took place over the last several weeks. I want to talk about a couple of things before we dig into message this morning. First of all, this coming Friday, you know there's something going on, right? And you'll hear more about this later. There's a concert, okay? This coming Friday night, there's a concert at Lee's Summit. Loving the Outcome is the name of the group, which they are very good. You look them up, check them out. There's a number of songs that they've got out there that folks have just attached to in a big way. But here's what I want you to know. It's bigger than a concert. Because the purpose of Friday night's concert is really about raising some funds for Project Nick, which is our orphan effort as the Heart of Life Church that enables us to fund our shelters like the one that we have in China. And in case you didn't know about that, we have a shelter there where primarily kids who were born with AIDS and are just thrown into the streets. I don't mean that in any other way but literally thrown into the streets. And there is a place now that the Heart of Life Church provides where they can find food, shelter, clothing, and most importantly, some arms that wrap around them and communicate the love of Jesus, okay? That's what this Friday night's about. So whether you like the concert or not is not the biggest deal. It's about the mission that's behind it. I want to encourage you today to go, but if you can't go, buy some tickets and give them to somebody. It'd be really nice. It's only $10 a piece, and they don't even have to know how much they were. You know what I mean? You can make them think it's a whole lot. Buy a couple of tickets, give them to your neighbors, give them to friends. We need to fill that place up for that purpose. We need about 400 folks, and I think we got like 25 from here so far. All right. So I know for some of you it's just something you've been meaning to do. Today, get them before you leave. Right? TJ's going to be telling you some more after a while, but I encourage us to let's be a part of such a great purpose that's even bigger than the concert, and we can fill that place up. All right? So I encourage you to do that. Second, what's happening tonight? Baptisms. That's right. So along with celebrating baptisms, I mean, there's like bounce houses for the kids, and we're going to have fireworks, and there's hamburgers and brats and chicken and hot dogs. Do I have you yet? You need to be there, all right? It's just gonna be a great night together, and I'm encouraging you to be a part. And so the lawn chair, first of all, is to remind you that tonight you need to bring your lawn chair, okay? Bring your lawn chair. Hopefully the weather will be cool by then, as far as, stuff in the sky. I was there last night at 6:30, and there is shade everywhere. So just know that if the sun pops back out, you got shade. I think it's just going to be a really comfortable place, and we're going to have a great time together. Okay? Tonight. What time does it start? 6:30. That's exactly right. We'll start eating around then. Baptisms will happen later. Whenever it gets dark, that kind of depends on how cloudy it is. The fireworks will fly. Okay? It was 1982, July, actually, of 1982, that a man by the name of Larry Walters tied 42 helium-filled weather balloons to a lawn chair that he bought from Sears. No lie, true story. 42 weather balloons, he tied them to a lawn chair. All this happened in the backyard of his girlfriend's house in San Pedro, California. He anchored himself to the lawn chair and then anchored the lawn chair to the bumper of his friend's car with 2 nylon tethers. He took a few supplies with him, one of which included a pellet gun. Any guesses? Yeah, the plan was when he got to the altitude that he wanted, he could just shoot a balloon at a time in order to regulate his altitude, and therefore he could come back down when he got ready. They cut one of the tethers, and when they did, the second one just snapped. And Larry Walters shot into the air like a rocket at the rate of 1,000 feet per minute. True story. Look it up. He moved so fast off the ground that he literally lost his glasses. They fell from his face when he shot up into the air. And for the next several hours, he drifted around the Los Angeles, Long Beach area, including both of those airports, for the next several hours. A TWA pilot radioed the tower that he had just passed a man in a lawn chair at 16,000 feet. Look it up. The whole aviation, is it the FAA, is that what you call it? They wanted to find him. They just had to figure out what in the world he did. They couldn't figure out what he had done wrong, but 16,000 feet. He managed to shoot a few of those balloons before accidentally dropping the pellet gun. But he eventually landed in some power lines in a Long Beach neighborhood that left him dangling only 5 feet off the ground. He was able to climb down, no injuries whatsoever. True story. When they asked him the ultimate, obvious, why? His answer was, since I was 13 years old, I dreamed of this. By the grace of God, I fulfilled my dream. As a pastor, I do believe that God's grace was involved. I do. But I want to ask a guy like Larry, really? I mean, really? Is that really your dream? He went on at other times to say, I couldn't sit around any longer. I had to do something. And I think what Larry felt and how he acted out is just a part of a common feeling and action of our culture. You ever dream just something bigger? You dream of something more. But Larry, wouldn't you want to make a difference, to make an impact? Today, I want you to know that the details of your life, I'm talking about the gifts that you have been given. I'm talking about the opportunities that you have been given. I'm even talking about the pain that you have walked through. I want you to know today they are sovereignly appointed by God for a mission, and that one mission is worth leveraging your whole life for. I want you to know today that as a follower of Jesus, we are sent. We are sent. Did you know that in the Gospel of John alone, more than 40 times Jesus referred to himself as being sent? And then he turned to those who were following him and he said, to be my disciples as I have been sent, I am sending you. It is a mission worth leveraging your life for. If you are not sent, then you are not a disciple of this one Jesus. If you're not sent, then you are not a follower of him. We have already seen from the book of Hosea, Hosea was sent. He was sent even to bring back his wife so that God could communicate to the world. This is how I love. We just saw it in Jonah's story. Jonah is sent to some people that nobody else wanted to go to because God says, I love them. I send you on this mission. And today, I want to tell you another story that we find in the Bible. This is just it's turning into one of those summers where we're learning some stories from the Old Testament. Anybody learning anything? Learning some stories, even if you thought you heard them. Maybe you thought you heard them before, but just to dig into them, we're learning some stuff. I want to tell you another one today. In the Old Testament, that it takes place in modern day Iran. In that day, it would have been called Persia. The capital city was called Susa, which today, modern day city, is called Shush. Just like you tell somebody shush, that's how it's shush, that's the word. It happened in about 483 BC, when God's people have been in exile, which means they're not in the land that God had promised them because they had all turned at times to idols and they would not listen to God. They were refusing to obey. And so God let them experience the consequences of what it is to walk away from Him. And He allowed them to be taken into exile. They were captured by a nation, the Babylonians, who were led by a king named Nebuchadnezzar. And then they were captured by the Persians, who were led by a king named Darius, who was then followed by a king named Xerxes. All right? Think Xerox, okay? Xerxes. If I call him Xerox during the story, that's how I do that stuff. All right? Xerxes. And so here's how the story goes. One day, Xerxes throws a party. And at this party, he's plastered. Okay, he's drunk. And in such a state, he makes an order. And this is how the order goes in the Bible, in the book of Esther, if you want to follow along. It's before Psalms. So if you get to Psalms, go 2 books back and you're at Esther. Esther chapter 1, verse 11, this is what the king commands. To bring before him Queen Vashti. Okay, so she's his queen. So Xerxes is the king, Vashti is the queen, wearing her royal crown in order to display her beauty to the people and nobles, for she was lovely to look at. Now, the context, scholars are very divided on exactly what's taking place here, but they all agree that whatever takes place here is something scandalous. They get that from the culture. So some think that he was asking her to come into the party where he's got all these bigwigs, all these nobles, and he wants her to come in with wearing her crown unveiled, which would have been scandalous even in a Persian culture, to just come in unveiled, for a woman to be unveiled in that setting. Most scholars, however, think that it is more likely that he asked her to come in wearing a crown. Period. Like no veil, no nothing, just a crown. Okay? Most scholars believe that's probably what's taking place here. She said, no. Now, I'd love to know exactly how she said that in that moment. Maybe one day we'll find out. But she basically says no, which is good for you, Vashti. But it embarrasses the king because the king just made a command in front of all these people. And after all, he's the king. Well, one of his advisors, if you will, comes to him and says, King, you got to step it up, man. You got to take one for the team here. And here's what he says in verse 16 of chapter 1. Queen Vashti has done wrong, not only against the king, but also against all the nobles and the peoples of all the provinces of King Xerxes. For the queen's conduct will become known to all the women, and they will despise their husbands and say, King Xerxes commanded Queen Vashti to be brought before him, and she would not come. This very day, the Persian and Median women of nobility who have heard about the queen's conduct will respond to all the king's nobles in the same way. There will be no end of disrespect and discord. Now, I got to tell you personally, when I read this story, I'm thinking this is just a guy who was disappointed because he didn't get the show that he wanted to see. You know what I'm saying? But his argument is rebuking the king, not because the king had the audacity to ask his wife to wear a crown and nothing else in front of everybody else. Now look, if you want to buy a crown for your wife and she's cool with you buying her a crown, buy her a crown. But gentlemen, that crown's only for you. They didn't critique the king because of what he did. They critiqued him because then he didn't step up and be the man and make her do what he had told her to do. And they're basically arguing, if you let that happen in your household, what's going to happen in all of our households? King, this is going to be just chaos. Our kingdom's going to fall. Can't you just hear it? Well, the king banishes Vashti. He banishes her from the kingdom. And what happens next is he holds a contest eerily similar to The Bachelor to replace her. Okay? Verse 2 of chapter 2. Verse 2 of chapter 2. Let a search be made for beautiful young virgins for the king. Okay, it's not exactly like The Bachelor, but you get the point, okay? Verse 4. Just wondering who watches The Bachelor, that's all. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. Verse 4. This advice appealed to the king and he followed it. Okay? And then the Bible says that one of the young girls who became a part of such a contest, if you will, was Esther. A Jewish girl named Esther. She entered the contest. And here's what it says in verse 7. This young woman, who was also known as Esther, had a lovely figure and was beautiful. Shall I translate? She was smoking hot. That's what that means, okay? Mordecai had taken her as his own daughter when her father and mother died. So Esther's story is she's an orphan. Her mom and dad had died. Mordecai takes her in, treats her like, his own daughter, and she becomes a part of this process. Then this is how the contest works, okay? They bring in all these young ladies from all over the kingdom. They become a part of basically a harem. That's how it works. They would start giving them, the right food. They would start giving them beauty treatments. And then one by one, the appointed time would come where they would appear before the king, okay? I'm sure in a swimsuit with a talent, okay? And they would do their thing for the king. They would spend the night with him. And then the king would decide who he liked. Like I said, it's kind of like The Bachelor. Well, verse 17 says, now the king was attracted to Esther more than to any of the other women. And she won his favor and approval more than any of the other virgins. So he set a royal crown on her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. Now, some of you, like me, grew up in church, and you heard the cleaned up version of this story. And you walked away thinking that Esther, this was a young lady who would be an example of virtue for our young ladies. This isn't the cleaned up version that you actually read when you get into Scripture. This is not what you want your daughters emulating. It is not. Not only does she become a part of just this immoral system, all right, which I realize that there's a question of, did she have any choice in that matter? Were these young ladies forced to be a part of such a thing, which may to some degree be the case. But what we also know from the story is that she remains silent about being Jewish. Therefore, she remains silent about her belief in God. Now I realize that Uncle, Morty told her to do that, but he ain't God. And God's already clarified, this is how my people are to act. They're not to be ashamed of following me. I mean, she's coming along at the same, time frame in here where we got guys like Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. I mean, when they get put in these tough spots, they're going, look, we trust our God no matter what happens to him. This is a totally different picture. She just remains silent about God. She is involved in this immoral system. I'm saying this is not the pattern. It's not the pattern. So back to the story. After she is queen, a guy by the name of Haman, who is sort of the prime minister of the kingdom, decides that the Jews are a problem. And his solution is pretty simple. Let's just kill them all. Okay? So check this out. You got a prime minister of Iran who wants the Jews dead. That's hard to imagine, right? That's what's happening here. And so he brings that plan to Xerxes, the king, who probably was, busy planning for the next beauty contest, but he just kind of doesn't really pay attention to what's taking place there. And the next thing you know, this whole thing is set in motion. Well, Mordecai happens to work out just outside of the palace, and he finds out about the plot. And so he gets word to Esther, who is now what? Queen. And he says, you got to do something. They're planning to wipe out the Jews. They're planning to wipe us out. She replies by reminding him of what happens to people who go against what the king says. The very reason that she is queen has taken place because the queen before her would not obey. And so she sends the word back to Mordecai saying, look, this is what happens. And Mordecai responds in chapter 4, verse 13. And you can read this whole thing this week. I'm obviously giving you the quick story, but verse 13, he sent back this answer. So this is Mordecai back to her. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place. I like that. Hang on to that. But you and your family's father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position. And the most famous line of the book of Esther is this: for such a time as this. Esther, who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this? He says God's going to accomplish his purpose, Esther. He's going to save his people. These are God's people, and he's proven it over and over again. But God's sovereignty is not an excuse for you or I to be silent, Esther. God's sovereignty is not an excuse for us to just sit back and go, well, whatever's going to happen is going to happen. God's sovereignty actually empowers his people to go for the crazy, bold things that end up being put in front of us, that when we obey, he gets glory. And Mordecai says, you need to act. And she responds, basically, I'll do it. And if I die, I die. Now, let me just quickly give you the rest of the story before we pick up on just a few things today about Esther. The rest of the story goes like this. God uses Esther to save Israel. He saves his people through her. Haman's plan ends up backfiring, and he actually ends up being hanged on the very gallows that he had built to hang all the Jewish people. Two guys named Nehemiah and Ezra join in leading God's people back to the land that was prepared for them. And after several generations, a young Jewish girl who was a descendant of the very people that Esther has saved was visited by an angel who said, you will become pregnant by the Holy Spirit and you will carry the Messiah, his name, Jesus. Not a bad ending. Not a bad ending. I want you to see some things about Esther's life that apply to every single one of us today. I want you to see, first of all, God sovereignly placed Esther as a part of his plan. Do you see that? God sovereignly, God in control, placed Esther as a part of his plan. Now you say, but wait a minute, Jeff. I mean, you just told us the story. Remember what she did? And remember how she did that? Do you really think that God wants us to, did God want her to be silent? You know, did he really want her to be a part of such a contest? I know. But the fact still remains that God sovereignly placed Esther as a part of his plan. I wonder when she really woke up to the fact that it was God who had put her in such a place. There's a part of me that thinks maybe it doesn't happen until that big moment when Mordecai says, maybe this is it. It's almost as like she doesn't recognize that it is God who's placed her as queen. It is God who has orchestrated such events. But then she sees it. And here's what I want us to see today. You are at a place in life by God's sovereign design. And I'm telling you, it is with a role to play in his great purpose. And what some of you just need to realize today, his ability to do that is bigger than even the mistakes of your past. His ability to have you right where he wants you to be in this most remarkable plan that is worth leveraging your life for is bigger than even the mistakes of your past, just like it was bigger than the mistakes of Esther's past. Don't get me wrong, you need him, you need forgiveness. But then some of you need to realize, then you need to move on because he has forgiven you. And what has happened in your past has not disqualified you from the remarkable mission of being sent that God has given you. Whether the pain of your past was caused by you because of dumb decisions that you made, or whether it was caused by others of which you had no control, I'm not saying that pain's not a big deal. I'm saying God can use even that to accomplish his great mission in your life. God sovereignly placed Esther, and he has sovereignly placed you as a part of his plan. Second thing I want you to see is that Esther's influence was in the palace, not in the temple. Her influence was in the palace, not in the temple. And the reason I bring that up is because I think a lot of people think that in order to get in on God's plan for their life, they got to quit what they're doing and suddenly become, a pastor or a missionary or something. It's interesting to me that in this time frame, when God is moving his people back to the land that he promised them, they've been in exile, they walked away, he let them experience those consequences, bringing them back. There were three really significant figures in bringing them back. One was Ezra, who is a teacher of the law. One was Nehemiah, who was an urban developer. He's a builder. He's the one who built the walls. And then you've got Esther, who is a queen of a pagan nation. Interesting mix, isn't it? Not everybody was a teacher of the law. Not everybody had to become, a missionary, a pastor. Here's the point. You don't need to quit your job to get in on God's great mission for your life. You don't need to quit your job. God has placed you in a palace. Does it feel like it? Do you like your palace? I say that today because some of you would think, I don't live in any palace and I don't work in any palace. I don't go to school in any palace. There's no palace in my life. The palace is really whatever realm of influence God has given you. And my point is, even if you have a ministry here in the Heart of Life Church, which many of you do, you teach or you're a greeter or whatever, you understand that's not the cap of the mission that God's called you to, because you have been sent. Thank you for doing what you do. We need one another. This is a part of God's picture. We serve one another. We help one another as we come together, as we do. But whatever role you even may hold in the heart, that's not the cap of the mission that God's called you to that's worth leveraging your life for. You are sent. Esther's influence wasn't in the temple, it was in the palace. And God's given the same to you. He's given the same to you. Third, Esther leveraged her position for God's kingdom, not her self-promotion. I mean, she came to the point that she faced a huge decision. Am I going to do this for me, or am I going to do this for God's purpose? Right? That's the big question of the book. Is she going to protect herself, or is she going to use her position as queen to benefit God's people? It is the basic question of real discipleship, of what it means to follow Jesus. Whose kingdom are you living for? Yours or his? Esther said, if I risk the palace, I might lose everything. Mordecai says, if you don't risk the palace, you will lose everything. And it sounds remarkably familiar to what Jesus would echo. He who loves his life will lose it. He who loves his life will lose it. But the one who lays it down, the one who gives it, is the one who finds it. 4, Esther became great by giving up the palace. It's interesting in this little book that 13 out of the 14 times she's called queen is after chapter 4. In other words, that decision in that moment that she made not to do life for herself, but to do it for the benefit of everyone else around her, that was what made her a great queen. Some of you need to listen to me. She didn't become great by trying to become great. She became great by leveraging her life for others. Did you hear me? She didn't become great by trying to be great. She became great by laying down her life for others. We all have this tendency to make life about us. We really do. We really do. Even while I was on vacation, there was just this stark reminder of that for me. A part of what our family did together was we got on a boat and sailed a little bit out in the ocean and just got spoiled for a few days, and it was really nice. And one of the things that would happen every morning is the girls would kind of sleep, and my dad and I would go to breakfast. Just kind of a time he and I would go and eat and visit. And in the morning when you go eat breakfast, if you go to where they sit you down, they would sit you at a table with other people. Okay, so it might be a table of 10 chairs, and it'd be me and him, and then there'd be however many other families or couples or whoever's there. You're with people you don't know. Okay, now that is not that's not rest for me. That's not my personality. Okay, it is. It's what makes him soar. I mean, he's never met a stranger in his life. And to be honest with you, I don't mind going along because I just like watching him work. I mean, he's just good. He just is. It's just so natural for him. He's an extrovert. That's what brings him energy. It doesn't drain him. And so we go to breakfast, and I don't really have to worry about it because I know he's going to start engaging, and I can just pick up in places, And so it never failed. Every single morning we go to breakfast, he would ask people, eventually, we're having conversations, where are you from? What do you do? And as that conversation unfolds, it just leads to the opportunities, to actually talk about stuff of life. Can I tell you, every day we went to breakfast, every day he would ask every single person at that table what they did. And can I tell you that in those days, nobody ever returned the question. Nobody ever asked, what do you do? Nobody else at the table asked anybody else what they did or where he was the only one who took interest. Not you got them talking, guess who they talked about? Themselves. Which is a great thing to remember when you think it's tough to talk about people, not about people, that's not tough. When it's tough to talk to people about Jesus, Just start talking about them and they'll pick up a conversation. But it just reminded me in that week, nobody ever, and it was just a microcosm for me about how few people in this world actually go beyond the tendency to live life just for themselves and genuinely take an interest in other people. Do you know what would happen if we as a church made such a shift in the way that we think and in the way that we act and in the way that we talk to people and the way that we see people? We wouldn't be able to hold the numbers of people because it's so rare. It's so unusual. What if we showed more interest in others for the ultimate reason to point them to Jesus? We have a tendency to hold on to everything that we've got, even the church. We have a tendency to hold on to our palace for ourselves. It's one of the church's greatest struggles. In all the years that God's allowed me to do this, we want to hold on to our stuff. We want to hold on to our resources. We want to hold on to our money. It's what we do. Specifically, this campus that I'm standing before today, the Garden City campus, what you have done in the last, 8 to 10 years in modeling an unselfishness of giving beyond yourselves to not just benefit this place that we meet, but to benefit the next places that God is sending us to, has established a pattern that is contagious, and it is a pattern that we pray God grows in every single place that He lets us start. And you started it. Well, God started it, but He started it through you. And your unselfishness and continued unselfishness paves the way for us to live the mission that we are sent. And every place that God allows us to start, it's a part of what we immediately begin to speak into hearts of one day we need to give beyond ourselves. We need to give beyond ourselves. As the church, we're called to this mission, but we want to hold on to stuff. We will hold on to our tradition. We will hold on to our furniture. We will hold on to our songs. We will hold on to just about anything that makes us feel comfortable for where we are, not realizing that there are moments that God's saying, do you understand the mission I've called you to in sending is bigger than what you hold on to. I'm telling you, we will get this fully in heaven one day. Perhaps Heart of Life's greatness will be measured more by what we let go of for God's kingdom than for what we ever held on to. It'll be for what we let go of, for the mission of being sent. You are sovereignly appointed by God for such a time as this. In a couple of weeks, some of you will be headed out on mission trips. How many? Just curious. Anybody here going on a mission trip? Anybody going on a mission trip? Cool. We'll talk about that a little more next week. We even want to just kind of pray for that whole mission trip stuff next week. We'll do that. You realize you are sovereignly appointed by God? Do you get that? Do you realize that you are sovereignly appointed by God for such a time as this? Even the trip that you're about to go on, God was so in front of that before you were born. And not only has He got stuff in your life that's been designed, He's got stuff in the people's lives to whom you're going to. We're going to see that next week. He's so all over that. It is so sovereignly designed by Him. But what I want us to see in this series, who's staying home? Anybody staying home? Not going on? Guess what? You are sovereignly appointed by God. You are sovereignly appointed by God. Right here at home, you're appointed by Him. He has given you a palace. He has given you a realm of influence. He has given you a mission. And my prayer is that over the next several weeks, God would, again, awaken some of that in us. I don't mind telling you, I'm excited with everything I've got. Tonight, I think we've got at least 10 or 12 or so who are being baptized. We're going to celebrate just the greatest decision that they ever make in their life, this life change that God has brought about. But am I crazy to think that if we as a church really understood how sovereignly appointed we are, there would be baptism celebrations where there are 100? There are 100? because you are appointed. You are sovereignly appointed. God has sent you. Sometimes it's next door, right? Sometimes it's across the street. Sometimes it's in the classroom. Sometimes it's where you work. But he has sent you. I want you to understand one more principle about Esther. Esther is not simply an example for us, okay? She's not simply an example for us of being sent and just that whole obedience. And here's what I mean by that. Seeing Esther as an example will inspire you, but seeing Esther as an example will not empower you, okay? What I mean by that is, her story is just a really cool story, and you can sit in here today, and even if I didn't tell it very good, you're like, that's a pretty wild story. That's just a cool story of what God can do in people's lives, and you can be inspired in this moment by what you hear, but I'm telling you, just seeing Esther as an example will not empower you to begin to live such a life. Esther is not just an example. Esther is more like a sign. She's a sign that points to the example. His name is Jesus. If you see Esther as an example, you may actually just walk out of here discouraged going, I can't ever live a life that big. You know what? You're right. You're right. But we're not supposed to just see these biblical characters as examples. We're supposed to see them like signposts who point them to Jesus. He is the one who lived in the ultimate palace, but he is the one who laid it down for all of us. And what he did didn't simply do that at the risk of his life. He did that at the cost of his life. He knew what he was stepping into, out of a palace to a cross where he would die for our sin, buried in a tomb, arise on the third day, and now he stands before the throne, not of Xerxes, but before the throne of this universe. And because of what he has done, he now can live in you and empower you to the mission of being sent. That won't just inspire you. That'll empower you. Some of you don't just need to know Esther's story today. You need to know the one to whom Esther points. His name is Jesus. And some of you need today to open your heart to say, yeah, I want to know. I want to know the one who would love me so much. And I want to know the one who would consider that despite my past would choose to forgive me and live in me and give me a mission that is worth living for to the ends of the earth. He wants the world to know. And you are sent. And I'm going to give you a little preview next week. I'm going to show you the gospel never goes in front of those he sends. He could do it without us, but he doesn't. You are sent. You are sent. In 1993, Larry, the lawn chair man, died. Because he hiked out to a remote spot in the Angeles National Forest and put a bullet through his heart. Nobody ever tells that part of the story. Nobody ever tells that part of the story. You know what that tells me? Larry was still searching. Who was sent? Who was sent? I have no doubt that the God of this universe loves Larry more than you can even imagine, because he loves you more than you can even imagine. I have no doubt that he went to extents that will just blow your mind. But it's like, who was sent? It's the question I'm asking you to think through with me today, and to do more than think, to begin to pray through today. To whom is God sending you to? Who's he sending you to? Where has God placed you in the palace? Who's he sent you to? Some weeks are just so frustrating, aren't they? Because you got to deal with people. And wouldn't it be wild if some of those very people were who God sent you to? But sometimes we get so wrapped up in the battle that we forget the mission to which we have been called. You are sent. You are sent. There are things you need to get done this week. There are tasks that need to be completed this week. There's a job that you need to get done, and you got to do it to the best of your ability because you're a follower of Jesus. And it's how we're supposed to work. We do it ultimately for him. But do not miss the reason behind all of that is the mission to which you have been called. You are sent. You are sent with a message of most remarkable love. Hosea, that was a crazy story, wasn't it? You remember that story? Wasn't that just crazy? Hosea, crazy story. Him and his wife Gomer, remember all that? She cheated on him, that whole deal. Jonah, that's a crazy story, isn't it? Is that just not crazy? I mean, how crazy is it that God would pick me and you? And he would say, I'm sending you to some people that I love enough that I've died for them. I want them to know. I want them to know. So can we end this way today? We're going to sing a song together in a few minutes just to kind of close us. But could we just kind of spend some moments together this morning praying regarding this most remarkable truth in our lives? And I want to encourage us for the next, 3 to 4 minutes or so. Could we as many as possible just go to our knees before our God today and ask him to give us just a renewed picture of the mission of our life. And who is it, God? Ask him the question, God, who is it that you sent me to? Okay? Don't ask it if you don't want to know, right? But ask him, God, who is it that you sent me to? And then as those names and faces come to your mind to literally in this moment to ask God to help us to believe what he's called us to. Next week, I'm going to give you even more, I think, to where do we go in the next step? What do you do when you realize who that person is? How do you start to share with them a little bit? What do you say? This week might not be anything more than God's going, this is the names that I'm putting on your heart. This week, I want you to show an interest in them. Talk about them more than you do you. Just build a conversation. Just have some conversations this week. And while you're having conversations with them in your heart, in your mind, you're going, God, this is divinely appointed. This is sovereignly appointed. You want this person to know. Can we do that this morning? Just 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. Just as many of us as you can. If you can't kneel, that's cool. Our kneeling is not like extra holy prayer. Okay? Getting on your knees doesn't make your prayer extra holy. It's just an external demonstration of what we feel in our heart, that we're not the ones that pull this off. We literally kneel before our King, who is the one with all power, who lives in us. So I'm not telling you what to do here. You do it if you want to. You can sit where you are. It's okay if you can't kneel. It's no big deal. Your prayer is just as heard, okay? But could we just go to our knees together for the next few moments and you just ask him, God, who is it that you've sent me to? And when that name comes to your heart, just pray. Just pray for him. Let's spend some time with him and then we'll sing together. God, thank you for hearing our prayer this morning. Thank you for allowing us to be your children. And not just that you would forgive our past, but that you would then attach us to the most remarkable, most fulfilling, most significant mission that this world has ever known. God, thank you for the people that you have just brought to our hearts and our minds. God, they represent family, they are friends. God, in some cases, maybe even enemies. But the truth of the matter is, God, you sent your son to die for them. And I pray that the love that you have poured into our hearts by your Spirit would overflow. And even this week, God, you would lead us to conversations. God, lead us to encounters where we recognize this is you, divinely appointed, orchestrated by the God who made it all, sustains it all. God, it's by you. God, I pray that these would come to know how great you are. It's in the precious name of Jesus that I pray. Amen. Amen. Let's just stand together if we would, and we're going to sing. I want to invite you to know that if that's something that you need to do today, you need to trust Jesus maybe for the first time, or maybe you could just spend some moments praying with somebody else in this moment for who God brought to your heart. Do that. There'll be some people here in the corners. We would be honored to pray with you. Maybe some of you, there's baptism happening tonight. Some of you have been messing around with that for so long now. Maybe you've come to trust Jesus, but you've just never taken the first step he's called you to. Come talk to us. We'll be down here in the corners. We'd be honored to help you, maybe answer any questions, just to help you take those next steps in following him. Let's sing it. Let's sing it together. I love you.